Yeah, hey, good morning, afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of the DevOps live event. Today, focusing on application and test automation. Glad that you could join us this morning or this evening. Let's talk a little bit about microfocus and what we can provide in this space. And specifically, let's talk a little bit around the domain, and then let's look at some technologies. One of the key things that we focus on from a microfocus perspective is making sure that we can bridge the old and the new, taking application environments, taking customer environments that exist with huge numbers of legacy applications as well as modern applications, and getting the best results by merging both the existing legacy applications and the new applications. From our perspective, we deal with a huge number of enterprise-sized customers, and within the enterprise customer base, it's very unusual just to have brand new applications with new application architectures. So what we see today is a combination of existing application architectures, legacy heritage, where we could be talking distributed platforms, we could be talking mainframe platforms, we could be talking Java technology, we could be talking Visual Studio technology, or we could even be talking Visual Basic or old school C-type technologies. And then newer technologies where we look at things like containerization, where we look at things like the Internet of Things being able to tie together into our deployment and our testing strategies. So what we're looking to do is bridge the old and the new, being able to drive everything that we need together from one place. Excuse me, one click too many there. I guess our underlying goal and intention is to allow our customer base to move fast without breaking. So what exactly do I mean by that? So being able to drive implementation of IT change at the speed that our businesses demand. Again, what do I mean by that? Well, over the last few years, we've seen the increased digitization of businesses. We've seen all organizations moving from slower traditional waterfall type approaches to new agile type approaches, and again, even some organizations taking a transitional approach, moving from a pure play agile approach to a more traditional sort of scrum-full type approach. We're seeing a lot of change in the process side of things on the IT and the application delivery side. Why? Because our customers need to innovate as quickly as possible. We need to be able to get business change to market as quickly as possible. We need to be able to make sure that our customers are running the latest versions of our products. If we're a financial institution, we need customers to be accessing the latest version of the apps on their phones, maybe for security reasons, maybe for feature function reasons. If we're a healthcare, if we're an insurance provider, if we're an organization that works in corporate IT, we need to be able to get all of our business changes into our production environments as quickly as possible. Those business changes are the things that drive innovation, and they're the things that keep our customer base happy. Of course, the drive to customer improved business requirements, the drive to faster time to market has increased the pressure on the development organizations. The development organizations have in turn been pushing to drive their changes into operational environments. But of course, operational environments don't want to be updated. Your operations teams, even if we consolidate into a more DevOps type approach, won't want to push any changes into our operational environments, our production or our high-level testing environments without 100% guarantee that we know they're going to be successful, they're going to deploy, they're going to work successfully. The way that we address this need for agility and speed on the development side and compliance and control on the operations side is through automation. We automate as much as possible the delivery of our applications into environments and the testing of those applications in our environments. And we're using the same automation processes to drive everything through our entire SDLC or end-to-end software delivery lifecycle. Well, there was a lot of clicks that I just did and a slide just built out. But it's part of a bigger picture. If we look at the end-to-end world of the software ecosystem, what we can see at the top level, we have our project portfolio management, where our projects where our portfolios are being captured, where the work that we need to deliver from a corporate governance perspective gets created and driven down into our project teams. That will lead into enterprise changes using our enterprise change management tools. Now, of course, as Micro Focus, we provide a number of tools in both of these spaces, the PPM solution at the top level, the enterprise change management using the Service Manager tool, or the SPM tool, the Enterprise Change Management, but we also integrate to third-party tools, things that customers tend to use, like ServiceNow, for example, maybe Remedy from the BMC side on the Enterprise Change Management side. But we're seeing a flow of input into the system coming from the top or from the side, where we see our requirements coming from our business. And this will all transition into agile planning tools, into source code management, where we're looking at our different repositories, maybe using a Dimension CM or StarTeam or AccuWeb or Git or a Subversion, basically following the flow of the artifacts and the changes through our processes. Those changes will go through our development environment, which may be containerized, or they may be cloud or physical or virtual infrastructure. Once we've done our code commit, we'll see our CI/CD process. So our continuous integration process will allow our source code to be compiled and pushed into our lower-level testing environments. Once we've done that, we'll start pushing true deployment and test automation through our later testing environments, our UAT environments, our OAT environments, our pre-production environments that we may need to do some security and performance testing against, and then finally into our formal release processes into our production environments. That process of source code management, build, CI, deployment, test, automation, we'll see as a continuous delivery flow. You'll notice there are a couple of different colors here. We'll see the blue boxes are what we're really going to be talking upon today and running a quick demonstration through when we get into the interesting part, which is the technology, in a couple of minutes. At the end of this process, we'll see not just formal releases for individual applications, but enterprise releases that consolidate multiple releases and include test and deployments from multiple source code systems across multiple applications. And of course, tying this all together with the back end is our ITSM solution, tracking incidents and problems, which will then flow back through the process into changes. So our end-to-end flow is pretty straightforward. In this case, we're going to focus on the commit to code, the CI/CD, the deployment and the test automation piece, and then how that hangs together in our formal release management space. Of course, underpinning all of this, we have security, which allows us to tie everything together the same way, and we can track and trace every single commit and every single activity that happens through our analytics software to predict patterns into what's happening, allowing us to track and trace not just our deployments and our tests, but our end-to-end SDLC process. Or in this case, have a lot more clicks before my slide transitions. Interesting. Okay. I think pretty much the DevOps story and why DevOps is important for enterprises and enterprise IT, we've talked about in previous webinars, but of course what we're looking to do is smaller incremental changes, reducing the risk of deployments into environments, reducing the risk of production deployment time of our changes. And of course, as we're doing all of this, we want to be able to simplify our process and integrate our app dev, our QA, and our IT operations focus into a single point where we can have all the control and visibility that we need, which gives us a seamless transition from development to operations. And of course, another way of seeing this is basically to implement a combination of continuous delivery practices and enterprise release management practices, where we can draw the boundaries based upon each application of what type of approach do we want to take. So we may have an application that goes all the way to the end of UAT with continuous delivery before we put our release management practices in place for production deployments, and along the way we're going through our build, our deployment and test automation and our processes for that application. Or we may have an application that the enterprise release function kicks in much, much earlier in the cycle. And again, our testing and our test automation kicks in earlier on as part of our CI/CD build processes and then our extension into our environments. So just a couple of things on what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a combination of release process, where we'll see a hierarchical release going out. That's our enterprise process around releasing. And then we'll see some artifact management piece where we'll see our automation technology integrating into some of our testing technology. Now, in this case today, we're going to be looking at the micro-focus Silk product for testing, but we have exactly the same capabilities when we're looking at our micro-focus ALM or micro-focus Octane or micro-focus Quality Center products, which all fit into the same domain. We can hook in and interact and integrate in the same way. So again, today we'll look at the Silk component as the testing, integration, and test automation technology and the packaging technology, but the heritage HPE, the Quality Center, the Octane, and the ALM technology working exactly the same. And we'll see a CI/CD process running with deployment automation as the Silk product, and we'll also see a formalized release process taking it up to the larger level with multiple applications. So that's enough of me talking for the time being. At this point, what I'm going to do is there'll probably be a quick flicker on your end as I share my screen. I just want to make sure that I'm sharing my entire desktop. So like I said, there'll be a quick flicker on your side. And hopefully now, if I jump into my system, there we go, we can take a look at some of this stuff in action. So let's begin at the beginning. Let's start with what we really want to get through in the next sort of 15 minutes or so. We have a mission of automation. There's our deployment automation product. It's sitting here. It's ready to go. We have a large number of applications ready to run. In this case, to build my application, I'm going to be using Jenkins, but it really doesn't matter which build system I use. I could be using Jenkins, I could be using TeamCity, I could be using Bamboo, I could be using our own micro-focus integrated build system. Because Jenkins is fairly prevalent in the industry, I just thought we'd go with Jenkins today. In addition to my Jenkins build system, as I said, we have our deployment automation tool sitting here ready to go. Our deployment automation tool is going to do two things for me. It's going to allow me to set up my application and then track and model that application as it gets delivered through my environments. So I can see my environments in my system, I can see the versions of my application that have been built and have been pushed into those environments. And again, if I just quickly call out a couple of things on this screen, we can see that in my dev and my test environment, I'm running version 216 of my application. If I go into my build system, which again, in this case, just for the demo, happens to be Jenkins, I can see my last build that I actually performed yesterday in Jenkins was build 216. So we can track and trace our deployment of our artifacts that we've built into the system. We'll also be taking a look into Silk Central. And in Silk, what I can see in my execution planning section, for example, is stuff that's been taking place. You could see on the previous screen there were some acceptance tests that had been run. But in here, I can go off and I can see all of my different testing cycles that we've got. So I can see my testing cycle for automated testing, my CI build, my performance testing, my GUI automation. This is going to allow me to track and trace the full history of everything that's getting executed. I can see any active runs that are happening. I can see my successful or my failed test cases. We can see everything that's running through my system in my different testing environments. So we've got our system pretty much set up and ready to go from a CI/CD perspective. The final thing I'll show is over here in my release control system. This is going to allow me to actually see the deliverables from a cadence perspective in terms of a timeline for my formal releases. Again, when we're performing CI/CD and we're doing test and application automation, we're tending to think about life at an application-centric level. When we're looking from a release-centric level, we might have multiple applications which all are dependent upon each other, which all contain content that needs to be pushed through different applications, different structures, different systems. So we can go through, we can take a look, and we can see, hey, this particular object that we're working on has got a different workflow, it's got planning, it's got development. We can see the phases, the success, and the completion of our timelines for our releases. So just to set the stage, we have our automation, which is going to be triggered by our build process. Once that automation runs, we'll go in and we'll actually take a look when we're doing the build, because it'll take a couple of minutes and I'll explain a bit more then. That will execute our test statement, our test automation. Again, with our test automation, we can get into quite a huge amount of detail. We can not just set up our test plans to give me coverage around the system, but we can get into the actual execution, and again, not just of our tests, but we could be executing Selenium tests, for example, as we're doing our test automation. We get the feedback of everything that's happened from all of those tests, even if they're in third-party testing tools, from a single place, which is kind of nice. And then finally, we'll tie all that together through our release system, and we'll package together a number of different applications. So let's take a look at this in action. Well, obviously, in order to make a change and to deploy a new build of my system into to my environment, what I need to do is I need to do a change to some code. Let me just, there we go, we're almost good. So webinar demo for our DevOps Live system. In this case, I can go through, I'm just making a code change to a Java application. In this case, it's going to update my about file. Down at the bottom, you'll see that we've got a few different Tomcat systems which may or may not be running. That's important because that's where our application is going to be deployed, and I can explain what's going to happen as we run through. But let's just save this change to my webinar file. There's my about file and the update that I've done. And in this case, of course, we're using a source code management system behind the scenes. In this case, we're using the Micro Focus dimension system, actually hooking over the top of a Git repo, which is kind of nice, which means that from a developer's perspective, it's kind of seamless. I can just use Git as I normally would, but from a back-end perspective, I'm using my dimension system, which gives me some enterprise scalability. So it's going to prompt me for login because I only just powered my system on. So I'll go up, I'll log into my system. It's querying my system. It's noticing the difference of the repository for my commit. So I'm going to give a comment in here. This is going to be my for my spell check file. So I'm going to do my webinar commit. In this case, I'm going to select a ticket that I'm working against. I'm going to pick a change request that's in my developers pending list, and I can just commit that into my system. So simple code change and a simple commit of application code into my repository. We can see our deliveries going in, and we can see that that's also being tracked against my system, my task. And there's my task list, and if I wanted to, if I had any additional tasks to deliver against it, it would be there. I've got new changes in my system now, and what that commit is going to do, it's actually going to go up and it's going to trigger the invocation of my Jenkins build tool. And it's going to do that in one of two different ways. Firstly, my commit, because I'm doing CI/CD, is automatically going to trigger this build. When it triggers this build, there's one other thing that's going to happen, and this other thing is pretty cool. It's actually going to go off and it's going to do some code inspection for me. So as part of my deployment automation technology, we've got some clever technology that sits there at the start of the process, and it tracks my code commits, and it'll then allow me to do a continuous inspection chain. So even before we get into the world of formal testing, we can do a check against my code commit, which has gone into the system. You can see that there's my commit into my specific branch. There it is in my Tomcat tokens branch. There's my webinar commit comment that I gave when I did my commitment. No, I'll wait on that one. And you can see that my activity is currently in progress. The reason that it's in progress is behind the scenes, it's not just doing a scan and check of my build, but it's triggered my build. It's actually building my application as we speak. There we go. We can see our build process has kicked off. It's probably going to take a couple of minutes to build out. And as it builds out, we'll see a number of different things. So we'll see what's called a chain of activities get kicked off. So let me see if I can find this chain, and I'll explain what happens. So this is the first part of my automation process. Not only are we going to automate the delivery of our application and automate our test execution, but we're going to go off and we're going to execute what we call a build chain. Now this build chain is going to do two things. It's going to go off and it's going to do a Java build, but it's then going to go off and it's going to do some more deployment stuff and some code style scans. If I go in and take a look, you can see that it's going to do a couple of quick things, but you can see I've got a number of other actions that I could add in to part of my build process. So I could add some build steps in here, for example, to do code scanning. If I wanted to, I could go off and I could do some container creation from Docker. I could update a Docker image. I could run a script in Docker. I could do some dependency vulnerability scanning. I can run HP Fortify for code scanning and code security. I can run white source for vulnerability scanning. I can run my checks and my QA and my SonarQube static analysis job. So my build process is actually allowing me to do all of this. My build chain is going to run, and when my build executes, as we can see in the background here, my build is running. When that build runs, we know that the build is going to be good if it comes back with a green blob. And we also know that it's going to be of the right level of quality because we've automated all of our code scans and all of our code style checks, and we've done a verification that there's no source dependencies that are wrong in this build, which is kind of cool. In addition to our build running, as I was talking, because my build is going to sit there for a couple of moments, let me just go back into my automation view and take a look at what's happening. So my automation view, when my build is successful, so we can see in here that build 217 is still running. My build's going to take another couple of minutes to finish off because it's doing some recompilation in my WAR file. But basically what's going to happen is as my system comes in, as this build completes, it's going to be added into a component in my automation tool. And the build that gets added into my automation tool is pretty simple. We'll see a new version will be created in the system. Again, it hasn't quite reached that point yet. The build is still running, and my version will appear in here as a 217. But once my version gets created, because we've told the system to do CI/CD, it's then going to automatically kick off my automation process. What's my automation process going to do? Well, my automation process is going to follow a graphical deployment process where it says, hey, once your build has been successful, once we've run through our code scans and our style scans and everything is good, we're going to go off and actually deploy this application into our environment. So we'll go off on the one side and we'll check if our Tomcat tool is running. We'll check if our Tomcat application server is running. If it is, we'll stop it and we'll remove our existing WAR file. If it isn't, we'll go off, we'll clean up some artifacts, and in parallel, we'll download the new versions of the WAR files. We'll unzip them. In this case, we're actually doing some dynamic token replacement based upon the environment that we're in. So we're parameterizing our deployment based upon which environment we're deploying it to. We're going to go through, we're going to do some verification. The verification of the deployment is important. Why? Well, what you'll notice over here on the left-hand side is we have a bunch of different steps under the tools menu that are available. So for example, if I wanted to do something cool with, let's say, Docker and call out an integration into our Docker system, maybe we could create a new Docker image because we want to be able to do container management. We can go out and we can call a bunch of different functions from Docker. So as part of our deployment process, we could instantiate new container infrastructure. What if I wanted to do the same with VMware? Well, I could go into my virtualization section and I could say, hey, I want to go off and I want to create some new virtual infrastructure. Maybe it's a VMware workstation like the machine I'm running. Maybe it's our ESX infrastructure. Maybe it's vCenter in the cloud. But we could create new technology stacks. We could create new infrastructure using virtual environments. Or what about if I'm in an Amazon AWS cloud-based environment? Well, I can come in here and I can do the same thing. I can say, hey, go to my cloud system and let's launch a new instance so I can deploy my application and then start that new instance. And let's terminate that instance when we've done our deployment. So we can do the whole provisioning of our application as we go. Again, if we wanted to look at some other technology, maybe we want to integrate into our quality center stack, we could go off and we could hook into QC. So we've got our quality center. We can do what we want in here. We can run a test set, for example. We can query the status. And then finally, let's take a look at what we are actually running. Let's look at our Silk system. And we can see in here that we've got our hook into our Silk system where we can either integrate and execute a single test plan. And again, up in here in our Silk Central system, we can see all of our different execution plans. Or we could introduce and run multiple test plans. And again, it's just a case of dragging and dropping my box onto my screen. This is going to allow me to build out my process. I'll get prompted for the values that I need to specify, my connection information, my connection strings. You can see it's prompting my passwords, my execution plan IDs, my build IDs that I'll be running. And then I'd be able to just simply drag and drop my lines to say when I should be executing this. So off we go. That would be my process that I'm going to run getting built out. And as I delete my step, because I'm not going to modify my process, that would make my demo fairly interesting. But what you can see is as I make changes, and if I save my changes, we get a full version history of my processes in the tool. So let's take a look and see what's actually happening. So in my build system, we're probably just still executing. There we go. Oh, we just, look at that, it just came to the end of the build run. In my code inspection system, I'll be able to get my latest configuration. I'll be able to see everything that's happening, so I can see that my build is running, it's successful. I can see all my change sets that have been committed. I can see my execution. And then back in my view of the life that I'm really interested in for today in my automation world, I can go through and I can say, hey, this was the deployment I wanted to run. My Clarios Online system. And my Clarios Online system did a couple of things. What did it run? It ran a deployment into my environment. There we go. We can see version 2 and 7 is in my dev environment. And version 2 and 7, because we have a pipeline defined, has started to deploy into my testing environment. And more than that, if I wanted to, I could take a look at the history of my deployment, and I can see what's happening. And when I take a look at the history of my deployments, we can see that my deployment into test is currently running. And if I go in and take a look at this, I can actually drill down into the full levels of detail to see exactly how long my process has been running for. And then I can go into every single step along the way, which will show me the individual process steps. Remember, we had all of those different steps that were set up to execute my process. We can see everything that's running along the way. We can see that we're currently unzipping our file, we're removing something in parallel, and then we'll start to continue down the rest of our process where we're going to repack our file, we're going to do our verification of our deployment. So we're executing our Silk test plans as part of our deployment process, as part of our full end-to-end CI/CD process. And again, it's not just a case of running the execution. If I go back into maybe my timeline view, where I want to take a full look at everything that's happening in here, I can see all of my deployments running. I can see how many deployments I've done on certain days of the week. I can see my active deployments, so I know what's happening. I can see my failed deployments. If I go back into my environments and my inventory view, I can come in here and I can say, hey, what's actually being deployed into my environment? 217 is still running. 217 is in dev. My verification ran successfully. My tests ran successfully. We're now deploying into test. And then finally, before we get into our UAT environment, we'll actually see our triggers and our gates to prevent us deploying to there. So that's the CI/CD notion in a pretty quick run through. Again, we'll see in Silk when we look at our execution runs. If I refresh and here, my execution was successful and my webinar run through has actually worked. What if I want to pull multiple changes together from one place? Well, the easiest way for me to do that is to work in my release control tool. And in here, I can do a couple of things very, very quickly before we wrap up and jump to Q&A, or where we're hitting the bottom of the hour and we're trying to make these live run-throughs as small timeline-wise as possible. But in this case, we could go off, we can see our release packages. Let me just close my Eclipse window, free up a little bit of memory for myself on that one. And let's create a open our package. Of course, it's always good to prove that it's live by getting a real typo in there. Let's give us a quick description of what we're going to do here. Let's make our important parts bold. We're going to follow a major path for our release. We're going to go down a deployment pipeline path to deploy our release into these environments. And then the final thing we're going to do is assign some ownership. Now again, the notion of the release control solution is very much bigger than just a CI/CD pipeline. What we're looking to do with our release control solution is package multiple application releases together, tie all of our application releases into our third-party systems, get the full visibility of everything that's happening across my entire IT ecosystem. If you're just deploying single applications in isolation, then the CI/CD pipeline that we saw earlier on with our nice pipeline view of visualization is pretty simple. But in this case, because we're looking at a much broader view of life, because we're really looking at how the application and multiple applications work together, we'll take a look and, yeah, there we go. We'll take a look and we'll make sure that we can track and trace all of that together. Now, there's a couple of things that I do want to show before we wrap up in the release control side. Not just the fact that it ties everything together, and the fact that you get some random messages that pop up on screen, but the fact that you can also do a lot of other things. So, for example, if I'm in one of these packages, let's see if we've got something in here that I can take a look at very, very quickly. What we can actually do is go in and say, hey, I've got a package in my system, and that package is going to execute some of our test plans. And it's going to execute test plans across multiple applications, for example. So I could come into my system and I could associate maybe a test plan. So in here I can come up and say, yeah, I want to link into my Silk test plan. And rather than just going off and associating an existing plan, so what we can notice in here, obviously in Silk, is we've got our automated test. And again, this is the same for QC, ALM, or thing. We can go through. We can say, hey, these are the different test plan folders that I'm working against down here. Maybe I could say I want to go off and talk to Silk, and I want to pick up my demo project, and I want to work in a subfolder. Maybe let's find things in our subfolders. We've got an automated testing subfolder. There we go. That one will do. This is just me filtering out everything that's in my system, and then I can find tests that are in my subfolder. Okay, well, fair enough. That's just going to allow me to go off and in real time query my Silk system to get responses. What about if I wanted to create a new test plan? So I could come in here and I can actually dynamically create a test plan. So let's do the same thing. Let's put it in my automation folder. And there's my automated testing folder. We can create a new plan. So this is going to be a DevOps Live test plan. Again, this allows our users to be able to work from a single point of control rather than having to go into different and disparate systems. We can create test plans in here, for example, for users to be able to work on the fly. This will allocate them their test plans dynamically in the system. And of course, it's not just things like test plans that we can work with in here. So although I just created that new test plan, we can create all kinds of objects in here. So we could create mainframe packages. We can associate requests from different systems, or create requests for different systems. If I go out into a slightly other area, let's take a look at our request section. We could hook into all kinds of systems, again, with our enterprise change management and enterprise release management technology. What we're actually looking to do is not just looking at hooking in our automation from our test and our application automation perspective, but we also want to hook in our tools from all kinds of other systems. So, for example, if I wanted to put in a ServiceNow request, or if I wanted to create a ServiceNow request, we could come in here, and assuming that my ServiceNow system is up, which it always tends to be down for some reason for maintenance at the moment, it looks like it is, we could go go off and we could actually create an item in that third-party system. Likewise, the same thing if we have Jira records that we wanted to go off and create or associate, we could go off in there. If we have HPSM records for service management systems that we want to associate, we could do the same thing. So our package is ultimately then going to allow us to go off, not just link in our tests, not just linking in our test automation, it'll link in our application automation for multiple applications, and it'll allow us to fully track and trace the status of all of those deliverables across the board. Okay, I'm aware that I'm 6 minutes over the timeline that I was aiming to get done by. I guess one of the things that, if I can here and just refresh my screen to show you my execution plan, I can probably show you my newly created test plan. Let's just jump back into here. And we can see there's our DevOps live test plan. So of course, all I'd need to do if I wanted to execute this test plan from release control now would be maybe to associate some tests with it, which, I could go off and I could do an assignment of my testing on the test automation plan, either by some kind of filtering, which is pre-assigned, or I could do a manual assignment to my test. So I can really build out my test plan at this point. The release control will then execute it as we go through our different environments. So, okay, I'm aware that I'm kind of 7 minutes over my intended target line. That was a very, very quick run-through of a CI/CD pipeline-based approach to just application automation and test automation running together in parallel. It was our build process. It was our code style check, our continuous inspection process, validating our code and our builds, running through our environments in sequence using our pipeline capabilities and executing our test plan. And then it was a very, very brief touch through on the release control motion, packaging all of those different objects together for enterprise level releases for our higher level environments, and also associating new test plans or maybe ServiceNow or Jira tickets to create and link everything together. At that point, I'm going to pause. Brent, over to you, and any questions that may be in the system.
Well, one, thank you, Julian, for going over all that. It's okay, you went a little over the time allotted. I think everybody was interested in what you were showing. We had a couple of questions that came in. You were talking about the build chain that's available in Dimension CM. Is that in, which version of 14 is that? Is that newer versions like 14.4, or is that older ones like 14.1?
That's in 14.2 and onwards. 14.4 has a load of really, really good capabilities that have been extended. So 14.4 comes out in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. That has a bunch of other capabilities around build and test automation. But yeah, I mean, from the Pulse side, pretty much most of what we showed today is in 14.1, 14.2, and then there are a few new features in the 14.4.
Excellent. We had another question come in around how you're integrating with Silk. Was that, if somebody has Silk Performer, can they do a lot of the integrations, or do they have to have Silk Central to be able to do the full integration?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our default approach is to integrate through Silk Central because that allows us to track and trace all the deliverables through multiple Performer projects and get a dashboard and visibility. But we can call out directly to Silk Performer if need be from the automation technology. So if you wanted to just execute your Performer tests without needing to go through Central, that's more than possible, and yeah, it just plugs in the back way and exactly the same way as the Central plugin works. So you can just decide which Performer runs and which Performer plans that you want to execute, which Performer tests that you want to invoke, and we get the status back from those tests, and they come straight back into deployment automation or release control.
Awesome. We have one more question around, you had talked to the build process, how you were using Dimension CM with actually a Git archive through Pulse. How is that all integrated into the system?
Sorry, I lost you for a second there. Did you say with the Git integration or?
Yeah, the Git integration with Dimension CM. You said that you were using CM to pull the Git builds.
No, again, that's a great question. So the way the system works, we basically have some mirroring capabilities. We have a direct connection into Git from Dimensions CM. So the Git and Dimensions layers are pretty much seamless. So the Git capabilities that we have basically allow your developers to continue using Git as they maybe would, and under the covers, what it's actually using is Dimensions, almost like a master repo. It's basically allowing us to take the Git repos and to fully sync them into Dimensions. And when we fully sync them into Dimensions, of course, we have all the power and capability of Dimensions, including the pulse code scan and integration capability. So we can take an entire Git repo, we can take a branch, we can take multiple Git repos, and we can run them through the process of code inspection and then the CI/CD process that we saw in the demo today. So it's basically Dimensions running almost like a Git master where all the other repos are syncing with it, and from a developer perspective, as far as they're aware, they're just using regular Git. It's pretty cool.
Well, excellent. Well, thanks again, Julian. That was all the questions that we had for today. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and look for our other DevOps Live webinars coming up. We have one in December and one in January. You'll be seeing information about those in the webinar recording that will be coming out tomorrow. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Julian. Once again, have a great day.